So when you shoot travel videos, you can't carry too much stuff with you, right? But you still want to get smooth footage, smooth B-roll shots. So in this video, I will show you how I do it, how I get smooth shots with my camera without using any stabilization or stuff like that. Let's start with some basic stuff about your camera. So when you get a camera for handheld B-roll, you should be sure that you have at least some sort of stabilization. I personally use the Panasonic GH5, which has very good sensor stabilization. In my opinion, sensor stabilization is the best you can get because it shifts the sensor around so you don't lose any quality and you have very good stabilization even if your lens is not stabilized. Like in my case here, it's a Sigma 18-35 lens, it doesn't have any stabilization, so the sensor stabilization works pretty good. But of course, not every camera has that, and you don't need to use Panasonic. You can use other cameras for that. In that case, it makes sense to get a camera that has at least digital image stabilization. For example, Canon cameras have that, or GoPro, for example. GoPro has very good digital stabilization, but of course, GoPro is not the most professional camera, even if it can get very nice footage. But let's say your camera doesn't have any stabilization, then you should at least use a lens with optical image stabilization, because otherwise your footage will just get jittery and it will not be possible to get good or smooth B-roll shots. What you can also do to make your footage a bit smoother is to shoot in a higher frame rate, for example 4K 60 or 1080-120, because then when you edit your video you can slow it down, and when you slow the footage down then like small jitters and bumps are automatically not visible anymore. So that also helps a bit, but of course you can't always use that simply because you don't only always want to have your objects in your shot, like people and cars and so on, move slow. You sometimes want to have them move in natural speed. And then of course you can't use any slow motion. But so much for the settings. Let's now walk around here a little bit and get some nice shots, and I show you how I do it in a smooth way. Okay, let's start with a very simple B-roll shot that I do most of the time, and that is a simple slide movement to the left or right. The complicated part here is to really keep your camera steady all the time and don't turn it. So that happens pretty fast and it needs some training. And the way how I do it is simply that I keep my arms steady. Right now I hold my camera a bit up because I'm filming a temple here. And then when I hold my arms steady, I try to do all the movement out of my hip so that it all comes from my legs and my hip. And I try not to move my arms. So as you can see now, I'm only moving my legs and my hip. And sometimes I slightly move my arms a little bit more at the end, because then I can make a transition later in post because I have a bit more camera movement. But in that case, it's also not important if it's stable or not. So let's say I do it again now. Then I would simply go a bit farther like that. So the rest, the last part of that shot will be shaky, but that's not important because it's just for a transition. It's not really for the main video, so it can be shaky in that case. As mentioned before, sometimes the slide movement to the sides can be a bit tricky. So in some cases you can also do a simple turn to the left or right, or a pan as you call it correctly. So this is also quite simply, I try to move my arms as less as possible and then I simply rotate with my body. You can also do the shot by rotating your arms, but for me it works a little bit better if I rotate my body instead, because your arms just always cause more shake than your body. So also in that case I just prefer to move around the X of my body by using the body instead of doing anything with my arms or hands there that just cause more shake. Another shot that you can do, it's actually very easy to do, you don't need much training for that, is simply a revealing shot up or down, and by turning the camera instead of doing a slide movement. So it's actually a shot that we could also do here. So just set my focus again. And the way how you do it is very simple. You just hold your camera like that and then you turn it up. Now we're here at the belts, and that's actually a good place for a up sliding shot. So you make a slide movement, but you move your camera up instead of sidewise. And to do that, I just go a bit down with my knees, and I also try to hold my arms as steady as possible again, and then I only move my body up, and at the end I move my arms a little bit. I get a little bit more shake when I move my arms, but it's not too much. It's still working quite good, but sometimes you just want to have a little bit more motion, so in that case you have to do it. Now I want to do a forward moving shot here, and that's a bit more complicated because there I need to walk very slow and make tiny steps. I need to hurry a bit, I want to get the monks. So I do it like that. I bend my knees and I walk very slowly so that I don't cause too much shake here. Because what easily happens when you walk is, when I would walk normally, I could just show you that, then you see the bumps up and down in the footage all the time. So by bending your knees and make small and steady steps, then you automatically cause less shake there and it automatically looks better. Of course, even I sometimes get a bit of shake by walking. It's sometimes pretty hard to control, especially if you don't have a flat ground, if you're out in the nature hiking or so. So in that case, I stabilize it a little bit more in post. So if you see my videos and it looks like it was hard to get a smooth shot, then it's probably stabilized in post, yeah. It's actually good to learn to walk like that, because even if you use a gimbal, you have to walk like that to avoid getting shake in the horizontal axis, simply because gimbals don't stabilize in the horizontal axis. So yeah, if you learn that, that's also good preparation for later if you do more professional shots. Here's actually a good example for an easy forward moving shot. So before we've seen that moving forward can be a bit tricky and you have to move in a specific way, to walk in a specific way to get steady shots. But when you point your camera up, then you don't get too much shake even if you have a bit harder steps. So especially as a beginner, you can definitely try this out. So you simply point your camera up here. Of course, you need an object that is somewhere above you, in that case a temple here, and then you record and you simply walk forward slowly, and then you get a nice shot. What you want to do to make this movement in this shots a bit more obvious is to have some foreground objects. Like in that case here I have the trees here and I have the temple in the background. So by moving forward you can see the movement because the tree is there, or the leaves of the tree, and you don't see much movement in the temple itself. So if there wouldn't be the tree, then you wouldn't really notice the movement, or only a very tiny bit. So always make sure in that case, when the object is farther away, that you have some foreground object. But of course, when you do very long movements, when you have to walk for like 10, 15, 20 meters, then it usually makes sense to use a gimbal, because it just makes it so much easier. And actually in the next 2 weeks I will publish a review about the Zhaihun Weebill S. Zhaihun just sent it to me, so also make sure to hit the subscribe button if you're interested in that. So now a bit more complicated are shots where you walk backwards, because let's say here, I mean here it's actually not too complicated, but if I would walk backward, this is definitely harder than walking forward. So as long as you don't shoot people or anything else that move in a certain direction, then you can actually also just walk forward, and in post you can reverse the clip and then you have a backward movement. That doesn't work always, of course. For example, like the shot that I got before of the monks, that wouldn't work because the monks walk forward and it would look weird in the video if they walk backward, right? But in some other cases you can do it. So what you've seen before is actually how I usually shoot my B-roll footage, but sometimes it can get pretty hard. So in that case you want to use a strap, and I use this stuff here from Peak Design, a capture clips I think it's called, and suddenly my setup becomes wearable. And a setup like that, when you use your strap, is actually very good to get a shot where you move your camera forward and at the same time up, because that's the natural movement that you would get here. And here's actually a good place to do that, because we have the temple right in front of me. Simply start recording and I just move my camera forward And because the strap gives me a center point, I automatically get a perfect movement there. And a good tip when using straps is to make the strap a bit smaller so that it's not too far away from your body, because then you can hold the strap like that and make sure that it's stretched. And that also helps a bit more to get stable footage. For example, now my lens is at about 50 millimeters, and about 50 millimeters it's a lot harder to get a smooth shot than, for example, on 25 or even 16 millimeters. So in that case I want to use my strap here, and what I'm doing is, let's get the focus, and now I get a shot of that Buddha there, a slide shot, but it's more complicated because I'm so much zoomed in. But it looks pretty good, as you can see, and that's simply because I use the straps now, and then again I mostly create the movement from my body instead of moving my arms too much. So that was a nice day here at the Wat Chedi temple in Chiang Mai. Maybe you can see that here behind me. It's a beautiful temple, as you could see, really nice for time lapses. And the sun is going down now, so we have to end it here, but I hope you learned something, you get some ideas on how to get smoother B-roll footage, even if you don't have a gimbal or anything like that. Of course, you need some sort of stabilization in your camera or your lens at least, but the rest is really just training. It's a bit like in the gym, you just have to do many repetitions until you learn it. So go out as much as possible, try to implement the tips that I gave you here, and then your B-roll footage will get a lot better in the future. And if you do your next trip, then if you shoot your next travel video, then it will be a lot easier than it is now. Hope you liked it. If yes, then please leave me a thumbs up, and also consider subscribing if you want to see more tutorials like that in the future. I publish once per week, so I would say see you next week.